So Dan, imagine you're coaching your former younger self in golf because you used to play professional golf. With the knowledge you have now, there's got to be some things that you really wish that younger version of yourself knew and embodied as an athlete. What would be the biggest piece of advice or pieces of advice you would give your younger self, specifically when it comes to golf?
Great question, Jay, and a very simple answer that probably has quite a complex underpinning. I would walk onto the first tee and I would strive to be aggressive, dominant woods. Aggressive, dominant woods. It's a technique I call a game face. It's something I've worked on with athletes, competitors for years, and something that I could have done with myself. It's not surprising the stuff that you orient towards as a sports psychologist can tend to be related to your own experiences of the game. Of course, that's going to happen. Aggressive, dominant woods. Woods is in Tiger Woods. Aggressive and dominant. I suppose that sounds quite strange for a sport like golf, but honestly, I would walk onto the first tee and I would have a whole bunch of what I call as a sports psychologist ants. Ants being an acronym, A for automatic, N for negative, T for thoughts. The ants would tend to revolve around, that player is better than me. Wow, what a great swing he's got. Oh, he hits it so much further than me. Oh, it's so windy. I hit the ball high. I've got no chance of shooting a good score today. This course is too tough for me. I've been playing awful recently. My swing feels horrendous. I would have those kind of ants, automatic negative thoughts. And the way that I would turn down the volume of ants, squash the ants, is I would have a game face, what I call a game face, which is ultimately your ideal competitive persona or your optimal mental state. And for me, it would consist of a couple of action-based words, maybe a model player. So for me, it would be aggressive. I want to walk onto that first tee aggressive. I want to walk into the to the ball in an aggressive manner. I want to walk off that first tee in an aggressive manner. Now, aggressive not being defined as I'm going to go and hit somebody, I'm going to challenge somebody. That's not part of golf. But just holding myself like that, having that kind of persona, that and a dominant about me, aggressive, dominant woods. And for me, Tiger Woods, holding himself confidently, managing his nervous system as he walks, as his round progresses. So aggressive, dominant woods, that would be my game face. I would strive to be that no matter what, whether I was 5 under, level par, 5 over, no matter the weather, no matter the course, no matter the conditions, no matter the competitors I was playing against, no matter the level of competition. That's what I would want to do. In that way, there's no guarantees that means I'm going to shoot a low score, but in that way, I'm taking charge of myself, I'm taking control of myself, I'm dominating my own mindset, I'm owning my own mindset. I give myself a better chance to get the most from the game I have on the course, whether that's my A game or whether that's my C game. And ultimately, if I'm on my C game, I want to be able to go under par. That's a very powerful place to be as a professional golfer. Go under par on your C game. I think that's possible, tough, but possible. And part of that is having a game face. So if I was to get in a time machine, go back, if such a thing existed, aggressive, dominant woods, that would be my persona. I would be it, do it, act it. I would embody it. I would enact it in order to go as low as I can. But unfortunately, no such thing as a time machine exists. And so I can't do that. But that is an example of a technique I might work on with a golfer or any sports person to enable them to get into a mindset that might be considered their best mindset that would help them manage themselves as the game progresses. So that's what I would do, Jay.
I love it. And I think if you're patient, in about 3 to 4 years, Elon Musk is going to have the time machine. So let's keep this in mind. So just be a little patient, just a couple more years. So we're with Dan Abrams, and he's a former golfer, as we just talked about. He's one of the co-hosts of the Sports Psychology podcast, Sports Psych podcast. Also a lead psychologist for England Golf, England Rugby. You've also helped Olympians. You've worked with Formula One teams, and now also in esports. You're also an author of Soccer Tough, Golf Tough. Sounds like you're never bored. So I would love to kind of go back to, you and I are both very big on trait embodiment. For me, it's all about embodying the traits, from your current self to your desired self, and embodying those traits. Because as much as some of us might identify ourselves as not being an aggressive person, we know what aggressive is, and we've had moments of being aggressive. We've all experienced, in my opinion, all the variety of traits, even the ones that we don't identify with. And so, what I wanted to do as a follow up to your first statements is, when you do have someone embody a trait and put that game face on, like you're saying, um, how do you close the gap between the current self and the desired self, that transformation that everyone's looking for? For example, if you do want an athlete who's not aggressive to become aggressive, we know we can get those micro moments of aggression if they're intentional and they're focused and they get clarity around what aggression even looks like. Because it seems like a lot of
Mm.
people say, oh, yeah, I'm going to go out and be aggressive. Okay, well, what does that even look like? Most people can't even answer that question. How do we close the gap between current self and desired self when it comes to traits and embodying them? We know that's a tool, but how do we make it so it's internalized and it's a part of someone's sense of self?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's a big question, and let's just go back a step. I mean, you mentioned embodiment there, and as you said, it sounds like we've got something in common. If you're into this as well, I mean, I'm very much into the notion that there's a bit of a myth around sports psychology or psychology within sport, and that's that, it's invested in the neck upwards. And actually, what we know now is that any kind of psychological tool or mental skill is very much from your head down to your toes, or your toes up to your head. That's not to suggest that there aren't just cognitive processes going on, but I would always say that any kind of cognitive process or mental process is by and large embodied. You act on your world acts on you. So it's very important, in my opinion, to see psychological skills as psychobehavioral skills. I'm going to embody and I'm going to enact the skills that I'm working on, whatever those skills are, from simple attentional cues through to the kind of optimal mental state I've spoken about, that idea of a game face, through to self-talk. I think the whole range of psychological skills in many respects needs to be seen as embodied and enacted in your specific environment, in your specific performance context. So let's strip back what you've asked here. I mean, I think the first thing is sitting down with somebody and actually helping them define who they need to be, who they want to be, who they need to be, garnering evidence from when you've been at your best. Tapping into memory, I think, is important. Tapping into memory is when you're at your best. What does that look like? What does that feel like? What do others see? And as you say, not everybody is particularly articulate when it comes to this stuff. Not everybody finds it easy to reflect on those things, because we're, as human beings, we tend to reflect on what goes badly, what goes wrong. And so asking, well, when you're at your best, what does that look like? What does that feel like? So just giving people space to think about that and starting to write that down. Especially in action-based words. Well, I'm energetic, I'm strong, I'm alert, I'm alive, I'm lively, I'm relentless, and just letting people unpack it from a tactical, a strategical, a physical perspective as well, and just relating those things to action-based words is important. So I think my first answer is just giving people the space to think about it, because I agree and disagree with you. People can't always picture that, but often they can't picture it because, or I'll at least give you a reason. I don't know if I'm going to disagree with you. I'll give you a reason why. It's because I just don't think people enter that world often enough. I'm sure you'd agree with me. Part of our job is to help people become aware of those things. So we can tap into memory, we can tap into imagination. Tell me about a dream game that you want to play. What would that look like? What would that feel like? What will others see? Who do you need to be out there? The skill of perception. How do you need to execute your actions? In what style? So let's unpack that. Let's start writing that down. Let's start creating a framework, a mental framework around that. And then let's break it down into simple words, metaphors that we can think about. When I'm at my best, I'm like a lion out there. I'm the king of the golf course or the tennis court. What we know, that sounds kind of cheesy. I'm a lion out there, I know, but what we know from some good work from cognitive cognitive linguists, if I can actually say that out loud, cognitive linguists, is that, and this work was done in the 1970s, that approximately 70% of our language is metaphorical. So we tend to work, our brain tends to work metaphorically. Action-based words are wonderful for representations of who we need to be when we engage in actions, when we engage in behaviors. So let's unpack that. Let's start to create frameworks here, and let's break it down into simple words and phrases. Then, when we've got that written down, and we can come back to my idea of being aggressive, dominant Woods, and let's recognize that some people listening in might go, aggressive, is that really the right word? I don't want to be aggressive. That's fine. Everybody's a little bit different. I pick aggressive because, you know what, I was just the antithesis. I really needed a kick up the backside. I needed an injection of confidence, and confident wouldn't be a word that would be enough. I want to go out there and really be aggressive onto the golf course, onto the golf shop. So that's appropriate for me. It's not appropriate for everybody, and that's fine. But as you said, I've got to unpack what that means to me, what that looks like. And then I think the next step is to go and practice that within the context that you play in. You know, whether that's, I do a lot of work in soccer, football, hence my book, Soccer Tough 2, and Soccer Brain. I want players to practice that ideal mental state or optimal mental state or game face, whatever you want to call it, in their activities, every single activity, every single session, every single day. So in soccer, it might be a keep ball, a small sided game, 11v11, passing with progression, whatever it is. I want you to practice that in your game face. When I went out to the golf course, I needed to practice in my game face. I needed to embody it on the practice ground. Simple as that. You know, when I was hitting shots, just be in my game face then. Impose myself on my shots in practice in my game face. So I've got to practice that. And then I think the next step is to start thinking about competition in terms of the mental side. Well, what is going to be my high performance mindset here? Well, okay, well, when I go out and compete, I am going to do that in that game phase. I am going to be aggressive, dominant Woods. Okay, what does that look like? What does that feel like? If it goes wrong, how am I going to do it? Okay, how am I going to walk? How am I going to hold myself? How am I going to present myself to the hole? And so on and so forth. So get it clear in your mind, practice it, put it up, probably up top, going into competition, design a narrative, mental images around that going into competition, and then commit yourself to going and executing in that way in competition. We've got all kinds of terms for that in sports psychology, as you know, Jay, like being process oriented or being on task or something like that. I mean, for me, that's what this is all about. Being process oriented means being in my high performance mindset, knowing what actions I want to execute and how the style in which I'm going to execute my actions, having some emotional techniques to deal with the challenges that I face emotionally on the course, just going out there and embodying who I need to be. That to me has to be put first. Those are the steps that I will take players through. That's a basic breakdown of what I would do. And then I will support them on their journey as they're doing that. That's a very narrow viewpoint of sports psychology, obviously, but that's the specific challenge that we're speaking to here. So that's kind of how I would go about things.
I love it. And you know, you mentioned the word execution, and what I find fascinating is, and because I listen to a lot of post-competition press conferences, I feel that whenever anyone's having an interview, maybe ahead of competition, you get to hear about their intentions, what they want to do, and it's a little bit more. I feel maybe the word's like posed or staged. It's a little bit too perfect. But what I like about post-competition press conferences is you're kind of still on the field. You're still a little riled. You're a little bit more loose with your lips. And so I listen to a lot of them. And one of the things that I've recognized is that a lot of these players and teams and coaches will have intentions, but yet they don't execute. So what's the barrier? I mean, because the intentions are there. We know what they could be. We know a lot of the intention side. and we know we want to execute, but there's some sort of barrier that's between intention and execution that exists. What is that barrier, and how do we remove its resistance?
Yeah, good point. I mean, look, there's two things to say before I speak in depth about this. I mean, the first thing to say is your question feels like the difference between knowing and doing. It's one thing to know these things; it's a different thing to do them, and it also smacks of the disparity between simple and easy. It's simple to talk about these things, but not easy to do them. And I'm a very sad man. I think about this 24/7, far too much, and I can assure I've got 27 years in high performance sport, 18 years now a sports psychologist, and I think about this 24/7, and I can guarantee if I walked out on the golf course and tried to apply these, because I don't play anymore. Perhaps I need to see a sports psychologist myself to start playing again. But I absolutely, if I started playing competition, think it's more to the point here, I would find this really tough to engage in, just because I say I'm going to be aggressive, aggressive dominant woods, and I can say it with force, or I can say it with authority, doesn't mean I'm going to find it easy. And look, I think, to speak to the specifics of your question, there are several things I would hypothesize about human beings and sport in general. Is that human beings are complex and sport is complicated. Let's start with sport first. I know people love to say, "Oh, well, baseball, it's simple," or, it's a simple sport, or soccer, oh, it's a simple sport. You just score a goal, don't concede. You can strip any sport back and say it's simple. I think the reality is sports are complicated. They've got guidelines, borders, barriers, rules, and so on and so forth. You're against an opposition who want to beat you. Some sports you're against natural opposition that can be brutal. If you think of team invasion sports like soccer or basketball, you're up against players who are trying to beat you, very good players. The game works in seconds. You've got all of these cognitive challenges, the ability to be aware of the 360 around you, take that information, act on that information stunningly quickly, or automate your skills so you don't have to think too much about them. Search, decide, execute, that constant triad that's going on all the time. Sports are tough, they're challenging, whether it's because of the opposition you're facing, or because of the nature of the sport. And then you've got yourself. Sports are also tough because as human beings, we're complex. We work from a biopsychosocial perspective. Our brain works in milliseconds. I mean, I think that's one of the main things. When I sat down to write Soccer Tough 11 years ago, in the introduction, this is what I wrote: is look, soccer works in seconds, but the brain works in milliseconds. And so the brain trumps sport for speed every single time. Even a golf swing, which lasts just over a second, your brain is working in milliseconds. And the brain is designed, in essence, in very simple terms, to judge what's going on around it, to want to have comfort, and so it's sending our nervous system is sending thoughts, emotions, feelings up to our conscious awareness all the time, which can distract, which can get in our way, which can limit our awareness, that can send our awareness internal when it needs to be external, that can slow down our anticipation, that can damage our decision making, that can damage our physical functioning, that can make us reinvest in focusing on the things that perhaps we've historically automated. There are so many things going on from a biopsychosocial perspective that you sometimes wonder how people actually function on the field in the first place, or on the court or the course, if you put it like that. Perhaps that's why I failed as a golfer, because I was overthinking it far too much about this stuff. So I think all of those things can impede on our capacity to go out there and play on the front foot, energy forward, with that positive intent, play at the right intensity rather than overly activated, where we're anxious, frustrated, angry, stressed, or under activated, where we're despondent and down, lethargic and flat. And then with attention on the task at hand, there's so many distractions out there, whether external or internal. So look, I tend to break it down to those three skills, mental skills there: attention, intensity, intent. So there's so many things that can get in our way from a physical, technical, tactical, cognitive, mental perspective. I always say to people, look at it like this. If people listening in can picture in their mind a box, or three boxes, I should say, that say technical, tactical, physical. From a very simple perspective, nobody denies that these lie at the heart of every single sport. Technical, tactical, physical. Technical, tactical, physical. Three boxes. However, I would say that there's another box here, a biopsychosocial box. Biopsychosocial, bio being body, psycho being mind, social being world. Body, mind, world, body, mind, world. And those three are interacting all the time and constantly influencing and being influenced by the technical, tactical, physical. I think that's a really good graphic. People have different graphics for this, but I think that's a really good graphic to get clear in your mind that psychology is constantly present. It is omnipresent. It is constantly interacting with the technical, tactical, physical side of things, and that human beings are complex and sports are complicated, and so subsequently the psychology or the biopsychosocial are meaningful every single second. So I'm sure I've left so much out as to why sports are hard. You think of the interpersonal side of things. You've got to communicate as well as do all of this as well. There's so many things going on. So I think these are the things that get in the way. And this is why athletes need to be trained mentally. They need to be trained psychosocially on leadership, teamwork, relationship. This is why behavior can be challenging. This is why the emotional side of the game is challenging. This is why learning isn't always obvious. There's so many factors there. So hopefully that gives you some idea of that landscape.
No, I agree. And I think what you just said really brings us to the fact that it's almost like it's a destination that you never arrive at, because I've got some athletes that I work with one-on-one that I talk to daily, that I've worked with for years, and honestly I've never run out of topics to discuss. I mean, in the off season, maybe it's leadership, maybe it's communication, maybe it's better being empathetic, which obviously falls within leadership, but maybe even it's just building empathy, or even just being an active listener. I think about how many times I catch myself, I'm getting much better at it, where I'm having a conversation with someone and then I'm already thinking about my response and what I want to say. But it's like, are you really listening to this person? And so it's amazing to me how many people just don't even feel heard. It's like, well, they feel that way because a lot of us just don't listen well. And so it's like an endless, it's not a destination. It really is a continuous journey. And so I love that you kind of brought that up in the end of what you just said there, because it is important. Because I had someone the other day, a friend of mine, call me and say, hey, listen, I need a favor. One of my friends, his son is about to go into the NHL hockey, and he needs a pep talk. And I said, okay, a pep talk. So one, I'm already like a glass and a half of Chardonnay in, and I'm on vacation in Spain. So I'm not really feeling like giving a pep talk. Like, could you please just calm? Like, I told him you calm. I'm like, okay, fine, I'll call him. But it's like, you really think that one pep talk with your son or one conversation is going to lead you to the promised land, and all of a sudden the NHL, Wayne Gretzky's titles are going to be at risk, and all his accolades, with one pep talk. It's just amazing to me how sometimes people maybe discredit the power of the mind. However, everyone says that sports are 90% mental. Why do you think that there's such a resistance? Because you and I are fighting the same battle, which is the stigma and the resistance to this as being an important part of an athlete's success. Why does that even exist when everyone, the same people that resist it, will tell you that in an interview that sports are 90% mental, or everything they say as to why they failed has nothing to do with, oh, yeah, you know what, the fundamentals of how so and so kicked the ball was really off, or our goalie wasn't using his hands well. It's never that. It's never the actual
Mhm.
fundamentals or nutrition or physical. It's usually the mental. Why the resistance?
Yeah, it's another big question that you ask. I mean, I'll throw a few things at you. Look, I think, I mean, the first port of call would be that classic sort of, the tangible or intangible nature of psychology, or so it seems to be. And this is where I'm a big fan, coming back to this notion of embodiment, that actually what you're seeing play out in front of you is psychology. You could argue, and I don't want to get too philosophical or esoteric here, that technique is psychology and tactics are psychology, and the physical side of things are psychology. I mean, last week I was in a gym at a very prominent European soccer club, talking with the sports science staff and strength and conditioning. They were just taking the players through a session. I was saying that this is a psychological playground here. Everything is at play here. Even if you simplify it and just say confidence, control, commitment, cohesion, concentration, all of those C's, they're at play here every single second. So his gym is a psychological playground. So it's on the one hand, it's very difficult to disseminate between psychology and the other areas. And on the other hand, psychology is always thought of to be quite intangible. So there almost seems to be a bit of a paradox there. I think the other side of it is that historically, that the socio-cultural nature of sport, the sports coach landscape, has been that maybe coaches have always felt that this is their domain and they do it, and some are perhaps better at delivering on the psychological side than others. And again, there's this kind of juxtaposition between it's constantly happening, but is it happening? Is it being done well, instrumentally, deliberately, on purpose? I'm not so sure. And I think that's where good sports psychologists can get heavily involved here. I mean, I think coaches do psychology in their role all the time, every second, but they're not sports psychologists per se, I think is the best way to describe it. So, but there's a socio-cultural landscape where I think historically, or historical landscape, where coaches, well, I do that. And very much soccer here in England, or football as we would call it, in the early stages of my career, and I think this is getting better now. I've run up against some pretty prominent head coaches, or managers as we'd call them here, say, well, I'm the psychologist. I do that. And there's a misunderstanding of what sports psychologists do, and also a fear of losing control. I think that very much exists. Again, I've been blessed to work with some very, very prominent coaches who, I obviously won't name names, but I would say that person is a little bit fearful of letting go of that team meeting there, that I think I could do a really good job delivering on this, and the players would appreciate it because it's a different voice and different words, but the head coach or manager wants to deliver it because they're just a bit scared of whether it's letting go of control or being seen as somebody who doesn't have the capacity to do it. And again, that's an underestimation of players and their ability to go, no, we understand that different people in this environment do different things. Obviously, I'm talking about the professional level here. I think if we bring it down to grassroots, we're talking about resources. I mean, resources being money and time. Then I would lean towards, as psychologists, have we been good enough at educating coaches how to deliver on psychology in within coaching programs, embedded, the biopsychosocial or the psychosocial skills embedded into a coaching program. We need to be better at communicating our message to help coaches deliver, in their activities, in their sessions, on mental skills and psychosocial skills. So maybe that's a little bit of us. I'm sure there's multiple other things. There's always going to be a bit of skepticism. Some of the best players in the world have shunned psychology, and often it's because, not always, but often it's because they've got so much skill in their hands or their feet that often they've gotten away with perhaps some poor. I can think of plenty of very famous golfers who've gotten away with poor psychology, what would be deemed poor psychology, psychological processes, just because, they're just damn good at golf. Give them a club, give them a ball, and they're able to hit just about any shot. So by and large, as a broad brush statement, any thought process can, but not always, be overcome. But it's the key, it's the not always. I spent some time working on the PGA Tour, and I worked with one player who said something very interesting to me. He said, Dan, this is brilliant. I spent a few days with him, and nice of him to say so, but he said, Dan, this has been an awesome few days. I've learnt loads. He was coming towards the end of his career. And he said, but I've got to tell you, I've won, I've done none of this stuff, but I've won $20 million, in the process of doing none of this stuff. But then he went on to say he had a double but. He then went on to say, but if I had known this stuff and if I had applied this stuff 20 years ago, I can't prove it, but I feel I would have doubled or tripled what I would have won. And that's not to, say my stuff is great. It's just to say sports psychology is great. Sports psychology is badass from that perspective. And he said, yeah, hands up. If I had applied this stuff, I really think I would have done better. I think I would have had more fun. I think I would have won more money. So I think sometimes the athletes themselves can get in their own way by saying, I don't need this. I've never needed this. And then I think the last thing to say is that we still seem to be a bit in the world of, this is a weakness. I don't need this. That landscape is getting better, especially with a lot of the well-being and mental health openness now on social media. But there's still those voices. Oh, do I need this? Is this a weakness? Am I going to look weak if I go and explore this side? And look, I don't think I need to say anymore. We know that we're stretchers, we're not shrinks. We know we're there to enhance performance, enhance well-being, enhance mental health, not do anything else. So it's a fascinating landscape, and it's maybe one we'll never ever fully solve, but something that we're chipping away at, and I think we're winning that battle.
Yeah, for sure. And like you said, I mean, I always ask someone, I'm like, okay, well, you just told me some of the things that have been holding you back. So if you don't face them or don't maybe work with me or someone that does what I do, what do you envision is going to change? It's dead air at that point. I mean, what's going to change? And it's, everyone just needs to face their fears. It's like, whether it doesn't even matter whether it's sports or not, whether it's relationships, finance, like with me, I know I'm really good at making money, but I'm not good at building wealth. And so that's my focus right now. Now, at first, it hurt to say, oh, wow, I'm not good at building wealth. All right, that's my ego. And I'm aware of it. I'm observing it in real time, being resistant. And I'm like, oh, look at little me here being upset that I haven't gotten to the wealth status that I feel like I should be at. It's like, well, okay, so we got two options. You can either continue with that narrative, continue with the same thoughts, feelings, and actions yielding the same results, or do you want to lean into the fear, and say, hey, listen, I really in the past have sucked at this, but I can tell you one thing that's going to happen now, which is I'm not going to suck anymore at it. And the way that I approach things like that, and this just actually happened yesterday, by the way, so that's why it's maybe front of mind, is I said, okay, you're going to make some commitments today because tomorrow doesn't exist. So tomorrow doesn't, you want to change, today is the only day you got. And then I start with that framework. So it forces me to make some decisions now instead of saying, oh, yeah, that's a great idea. And then, of course, going back to default, mode for the rest, for the next 5-10 years until I have another moment. But so it's interesting. Would love to Would love to hear. God, there's so many great things that you brought up. One of the things I wanted to hear about, you had mentioned with coaches them needing to let go of the power and control. And the phrase "letting go" in our world, we've got fear, we've got letting go, we've got overthinking. I mean, there's some words that you could write a book on, because these are topics that are always going to come up. What's kind of your framework and the way that you help athletes let go from mistakes and failure?
Um, there's so many directions I could go there, simply because I certainly work from the philosophy that everybody's an individual, and so I would look at the individual, their specific context, and what they're saying to me. But if I was to treat this question in a broad brush way, I think the first thing I would say is that I do strive to help players be process oriented, which I've mentioned already, and try to come away, especially during, just prior to and during performance. If I want them to let go of anything, I want them to let go of outcome and performance. I think that there's nothing wrong if we look at the way motivation works, and I think motivation is multi-dimensional, from extrinsic drivers and extrinsic rewards to intrinsic drivers and intrinsic rewards. I don't think there's anything wrong with athletes and coaches, considering the outcomes that they want to have and the performances that are going to lead to those outcomes, and really breaking those down, in the week, in the lead up to a game. I think come game day, where we want to limit mistakes and errors, then I think first and foremost it's turning down the volume of the noise, the distractions. And I think the first initial noise can be outcomes. Gotta win, and then performance. Gotta perform. And it's understanding that we now need to be process oriented, and everything works in servitude of performance and subsequent outcome. That's a real skill. That's a bit of mental gymnastics that I think competitors have to, I really think all competitors have to be able to accommodate the capacity to understand, I want certain outcomes that require certain performances. And so subsequently, I need to be process oriented. Now, there's a little bit of complexity within performance, because I do think, again, if I was to answer your question as specifically as I can, and I reflect on my practice and the conversations I have, I do try to help athletes understand that as human beings, let's come back to the complexity of human beings, with a body that has nearly 400 bones, with hormones being released left, right, and center, thoughts, emotions, feelings happening to us as we live our life, and attention going this way and that way. That it's understanding that we can't high perform, we can't have our best performances all the time. I actually think that this is a very interesting narrative that I've discovered over the years, and very much that I lean into, is this idea that, I often use scaling as a psychologist. So scale of 1 to 10. And I talk to athletes about, look, you can't, just as I'd say to golfers, you can't always be on your A game. You've got to accommodate your C game. I'll say to soccer players, players in all team invasion sports, you're not always going to be at 8 out of 10 or 9 out of 10 all the time. You're not always going to be outstanding all the time. You've got to leave room in your mind for accommodating average 6 out of 10, because there's very few people on planet Earth who are always going to be 7 and above, respective to their ability, their capability. And I think if you take somebody like Lionel Messi in soccer, I would still suggest that if you sat down with him, he would say there are certain games he's had where that are, for him, 6 out of 10. In his world. To mere mortals, it might be 8 or 9 out of 10, but in his world, 6 out of 10. So I think, respecting standards, you still got to accept that 6 out of 10 might happen. You've got to accommodate that. So the way I work with athletes is having them going in with as flexible a narrative around process as possible. My job out there is process. I recognize as a human being that there are going to be tough days, and some days a 6 out of 10 is a really good performance. It's the best I could have done. I had to be in my high performance mindset within my process to enable myself to have 6 out of 10, to maybe take a look at 7 out of 10, to maybe turn 5 into 7 or 5 into 8 or 6 into 8 or 7 into 8 or 7 into 9. To have my job is to have a process and a mindset that enables me to have my best performance and my best possible performance. That to me is a very sophisticated narrative around performance, and a very flexible narrative around performance. So then we've got to have a great, sophisticated, adaptable, flexible process in place. That to me is imperative. So then that now examines a look on, a microscopic look of, if I make a mistake, what am I going to do? How am I going to deal with that? That would come probably under the concept of mental contrasting. And mental contrasting is, if it goes wrong, what am I going to do? How am I going to put this right? What behaviors am I going to engage in? How am I going to, for me, stay aggressive, dominant woods, even though I've just hit it out of bounds? So am I going to use my self-talk? Am I going to use my body language? What am I going to do here? That to me is but it is built on a bed of understanding and accepting that mistakes will happen. There will be very tough moments. Teammates will play poorly. Teammates will make mistakes. Teammates will have a go at me. The opposition will play really well at times. Somebody might get the better of me often. That's okay. What am I going to do? We have to set up that narrative before the game in order to have a brain that is able to accommodate dealing with those moments. That's where it starts. And then we need to have enough of a routine in place on game day and enough specific strategies in place to help us remember to be able to do it on the go. And that comes back to the previous question of the difference between knowing and doing. I've then got to do it. And that to me is a skill. And that's what I say to players all the time, because if I get pushback, I often get pushback of, oh, but Dan, you're asking me to use my self-talk there. But, soccer, football is a very quick game. Basketball is how can I? And yeah, I don't want you to talk to yourself for 95 minutes, and I don't want you to talk to yourself for 4 quarters. I'm not saying that. But what I am saying is you need to engage in mental techniques to become mentally skillful in the moment, on course or on the pitch, on the field, when you need to. You have to be able to catch yourself and get back into your high performance mindset. That is a skill. And for as long as you go, oh, well, that's overthinking, I can't do that, then you'll never do it. Belief begats belief. So, if you don't believe that you can do it, or you don't feel that that's important, you're never going to do it. Well, I'm sorry, but the complexity of the human being and the complication of the game means that you've got to build the capacity to do that. And you're probably not going to get it right every single time. So there's a lot of layers there to your question, but it is a fascinating area.
Yeah, for sure. And I think what's interesting as well is, with me, one of the things that I recommend and even use myself, I like to play tennis, is I bring in a little bit of sarcasm. So let's say I make a mistake. Like I played 2 days ago, someone who I had beaten recently for the first time ever in like 30 years. And so, I already got that win. I'm like, oh, this is great. Yeah. But that was last time. 2 days ago, I did get beat. But what was interesting is I was making some mistakes, mainly because I hadn't practiced and I wasn't prepared as much as I should have been. And I realized that in real time. And the way that I manage mistakes and recommend that people do it is I always manage the meaning that, because nothing has meaning until you give meaning to it. And so I make them meaningless, other than the fact that there might be a little bit of an adjustment. Maybe that would be the meaning I would have, which is, oh, maybe you could consider this. Maybe you shouldn't be hitting so hard, or don't try so hard, or, maybe focus on your second serves and not your first serves, and getting more of those in, whatever the adjustment is. But I oftentimes will be like, after a mistake happens, I will say, oh, interesting, in a very, very sarcastic way, kind of to diminish the value, meaning, and importance of it. And it seems to work well for me. And then maybe if in that moment I have time, like let's say it was golf, where you do have a little bit of time, or maybe tennis after a set's over, when there's some time, I might invite the idea of some compassionate curiosity. Like, oh, why did I do that? Why did I react the way I did to losing those 2 points? Why was that such a big deal to me? And I might kind of go through some quick questions very compassionately. So I'm not kind of, there's no judgment, it's more compassion. Get a little bit of clarity by using some curiosity, and then say to myself, all right, what's a simple adjustment I can make? And just trying to like tone it down, bring in a little simplicity. And that seems to work well
I
for me.
can I love everything that you said there, and I love your ability in that moment to use real-time self-talk, and it making me think of, if we dive into self-talk a bit there, you're speaking to reflexive self-talk. We experience our thoughts or our inner voice, and that inner voice says, oh well, you know what, I haven't practiced. I've realized I've not been practicing, and there's so many mini directions. This is the fun of the fair here. There's so many mini directions you can take this in. You've spoken to a few, and as you were speaking, I was immediately thinking that potentially, if I was in that situation, I'd be thinking, I would build on that idea of curiosity and be thinking, hey, you know what? I haven't practiced. That's okay. All right. A bit of compassionate curiosity could be, you know what? Okay, look, I've been busy. That's okay. That's my life is busy. That's all right. Let's see how close I can get to running this guy close in this game. Let's see if I can get close to winning. Let's see how. Let's be curious about this. How good can I play whilst being underprepared in this game? That's a bit of reflexive self-talk I would use there, or compassion, as you say. Compassion, reflexive self-talk in that moment could be, hey, you know what, it's all right, I'm going to lose. If I do lose, that's all right, that's fine, that's right. All I can do here is, as you said, just give it my best shot, enjoy this, have fun, and get back onto the court and practice next week, whatever it is. There's so many things. I think one of the things that's not often spoken about, and to build on your point of meaning, is that when you work with clients, and I'm sure you'd agree here, is that sometimes when you speak to techniques like self-talk, it can sound meaningless when you're on a Zoom call and you're deconstructing what to say to yourself, and the tone in which you talk to yourself is very important, and whether that's in an energized tone or a relaxed tone, or just actually embodying within your own mind that curious tone. Okay, well, how can I run this guy close here? This is going to be a bit of fun here. I haven't practiced. That's all right. So I am being empathetic with myself, with my tone, and doing that inside of yourself. And it's giving yourself permission to do that, recognizing that that's not madness, talking to yourself, but that's just instructing yourself in the moment and enabling you to get yourself through what could be perceived as quite a tough time. So I think there's all kinds of mini nuances there that are really interesting.
For sure. And I think the only time it's madness when you're talking to yourself is when you buy into the lies and you believe the bullshit. That's when it's madness. Because a lot of the things that we say to ourselves, it's just simply not true. It's like, oh, I'm never going to be rich. Well, based on what facts? Or I'm never going to win. Well, based on what? Like, where are you coming up with this? That's where I think that a lot of us sometimes do think that when we talk to ourselves, that it's maybe odd or different. But obviously, we know that you and I know that we're always doing this, whether you like it or not. You are doing it. But madness is definitely when the conversations you have are not based on truth, but you're accepting them as such. And so I find that to be interesting.
Unless of course you're playing Novak Djokovic. If he's on the other end of the court, then you might want to acceptance, commitment might be along the lines of, I'm probably going to lose this, but I'm going to commit to my serve anyway.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, acceptance is a big one. I'm curious to see what your thoughts are on this. I think a lot of it is we have to accept some of our outcomes because it decreases the meaning, value, and importance of that outcome, if we sometimes even just accept, like, hey, whatever's going to happen is going to happen. A lot of things, obviously, especially in team sports, right? A lot of things are out of our control. Certainly on a one-on-one tennis match, sure, there might be more things within my control, but there's still the other opponent. But in team sports, there's a lot of things outside of our control. So we know control the controllables. A lot of people, that's their entry level, one of the maybe top 3 things that we all hear. If you just explore sports psychology for a little bit, you'll learn about controlling the controllables. I often like to use the word acceptance, but I find that there's resistance with the athletes that I talked about accepting things, right? Accepting that Novak is going to beat you, accepting that maybe, like you said earlier, you brought up a great point, which is accepting the fact that maybe today my best is a 6 out of 10. How do you get people to embrace acceptance a little bit more? Because I think a lot of the resistance to it for most athletes is they almost feel like maybe that's tolerance. Like that means it's okay. Well, it's like, it doesn't mean it's okay, but I can see where the resistance is. I've always struggled with getting athletes to accept things. What's kind of the way that you frame things to help athletes manage the word acceptance? Because it's tremendously valuable.
Yeah, I think my starting position will always be acceptance around outcome and performance, because of what I've described with the complexity of the human being, and that and and subsequently how acceptance can be of benefit to the experiences you have of your thoughts, emotions, feelings. That if my self-talk includes in directing myself towards the acceptance of outcomes and to a great degree performance, that I can lower the volume of anxiety and stress and doubt and worry. And so I try to have a conversation around those kind of things to help that person see the world through that lens, and we'll have a back and forth. And it's I think your question is a challenging one, in as much as there's always things that players will bring up from an individual perspective that might push back. But I'd certainly strive to be influential and persuasive around that notion of, acceptance is a word, whether it's an action word or it's a value, that can help turn down the volume of anxiety. And if somebody's coming to me with performance anxiety, I think that's an important conversation to have. If somebody's really pushing back on me, that's fine. Let's experiment in a different direction. So if somebody says to me, well, Dan, I hear you, but what I don't want to do is be out there and accept my performance as a given. I don't want to accept the outcome. What I want to do is find solutions. Then again, we can talk about acceptance being a forerunner to finding solutions, because when I accept something, I might put myself in a mental state that enables me to brainstorm solutions in the moment within my process. Or we might ignore acceptance completely and go on to, well, how can I be flexible and adaptable around finding solutions in that moment? And so we might start to talk about knowledge base, and again, I'll be working in sports where I have very little knowledge of the sport. But if somebody says to me, well, I don't want to embrace acceptance and I just want to jump to solutions in the moment because I'm not playing so well, then that might go beyond the knowledge I can give to them, but I'm going to start having a conversation about the knowledge that they have about their game and the game, to enable them to brainstorm what solutions that they will come across in different scenarios. So that's about scenario building, essentially. And again, I'm not acting as from a knowledgeable stance as a coach. I'm taking an ignorant stance, just asking questions and just discussing scenarios and getting players to brainstorm situations there. So I think we're kind of crossing two territories, but I think you've got to have a broad ranging conversation that's going to go in many, many directions, that by the end of the session, you really need to have navigated somebody towards, these are the things that I'm going to do, or these are the things that I'm going to focus on. And that's where experience as a practitioner really can shine through. And it's hard, it's tough. And sometimes maybe you might not achieve that, what you'd like to achieve at the end of of a session. But I definitely think as a practitioner, default for me is, I do think we have to embrace acceptance to a certain degree, whether it's acceptance of, I can't fully control my performance, so I'm going to accept a great deal. Certainly going to accept outcomes. Or let me take that back. I'm going to accept outcomes and performance to a great degree, but I'm also going to use acceptance as a way to clear my mind and start brainstorming solutions that might then navigate me to a point where I can have more of an influence on performance, and subsequently more of an influence on outcomes. And that takes a bit of experience as a practitioner to do so.
Wow, I love it. Yeah, and thanks for feeling what I think is a pretty challenging question. I mean, that's a tough word to break down, and I think you did a great job on it. And one of the things that it kind of brings me towards is, where we struggle with acceptance and we also hyper focus on results, seems to be that, and I'm going to throw out a couple different words, not for you to answer all three, but maybe to pick one or whatever angle you want to approach this question. But I feel like we have an addiction to prediction, and we have this desire to maybe sometimes fulfill the uncertainty in life, because uncertainty is a big deal for us, the fear of the unknown, right? So we have the fear of the unknown. We have this addiction to prediction, and I feel goes way back to the Neanderthal days, where our body's main goal is just to stay safe, and then secondary to that would be to replicate. But we also set expectations, and I think that, in my opinion, expectations are often give us like this false sense of certainty. Maybe pick one of those words, whether it's certainty, prediction, or expectations. I think, or the fear of the unknown. There's a lot to unpack there. How do you approach that? Because obviously that's where a lot of sports anxiety comes from as well.
So, yeah, I agree with everything that you said, and it's very much in line with how I neurologically see the brain. There's a few main theses or hypotheses out there from neuroscientists around how the brain functions. There's a lot of controversy. I believe in the brain as a prediction machine, that it's constantly trying to reduce uncertainty and constantly trying to increase certainty. So we won't go too deep into that. I possibly can't go too deep into that. I'm not a neuroscientist, and I wouldn't want to speak above my station. But I think those two words are important: that prediction and certainty or uncertainty. And maybe I'll come back to sort of an ultimate summary of what we've been speaking about, that as cliche as it is, that we want to try to help athletes have as robust a process orientation as possible, as robust a process as possible, and a process orientation when they go and play. And we have to appreciate, really, in many respects, that again, in very stripped back, simple terms, there could be two types of processes. There could be a process that's quite fixed. That is, I'm going to do this, this, and this. My language I'm going to have, if I draw on my books, where my passion is to demystify this stuff, and I've written basic, techniques such as game face, squashing ants, those automatic negative thoughts, having a match script, which is sort of 2 or 3 attentional cues that you want to focus on going again, that are premeditated, using controllers being self-talk and body. These are the kind of things that I write about, that when I sit down with a client, the first thing I'm doing is, if we're talking about mental skills, I'm working on these with them. And that's it's robust in that they can accommodate individuals, but they're quite they're individual to that person, but they're prescripted. It's a prescripted plan that they can then take out and use as a mental framework. I would argue a step above that is perhaps leaning towards what I've spoken about in your last question, which is, I think you could argue that world-class athletes are ones who, when they've been working on a world-class mental framework, those frameworks have processes that are flexible, adaptable, and can find solutions in the moment. So that, look, we increase certainty, decrease uncertainty by revolving expectations around our process. I expect process. That's what I expect from myself. That's what I want my brain to predict at any given moment out there. My brain is a prediction machine. I want it to predict process more than anything else. So when I see this, I do this. I see that, I do that. That to me is step one. Above that, I think for those who are very mentally skillful, they have the capacity to find solutions in the moment. Not necessarily problem solve, but find solutions in the moment from the experiences that they've had, so that they are better at dealing with uncertainty. So if uncertainty happens, we go 2 goals down. This opponent that I am against in a 1v1 is doing things that I didn't expect. Okay, I need to stick to my game face here. I need to stay in my game face. I need to keep using myself but I also need to think about solutions in the moment to deal with this. So they've got to come back to the things that they've spoken about with their coach in training. Maybe they've planned out a few things that if X happens, then I've got to do Y. If Y happens, I've got to do X. They've thought more deeply about the specific things that might happen in game that they can then draw upon to be able to find solutions in that moment. So in summary, and I hope this is making sense because this is challenging, I think step one is always, and often you don't get past step one with an athlete, is just, I want an athlete to have a mental framework that increases certainty, that they revolve expectations around, it's process oriented, and it better helps their brain work as a predictive machine around that process. Above that, it's mentally training somebody to find solutions in the moment, find solutions in uncertain moments, whatever that uncertain moment might be. My opponent is doing something that I haven't seen before. My teammates are playing so badly that the ball isn't getting out to me, and I've got to do something different here. In my 1v1, I don't know, in boxing, fighting sports, my opponent has come out and has thrown a curveball at me and is engaging in this fight in a way that I didn't think they were going to do it. I've got to find a solution here. So it's having the capacity to be mentally flexible with your, irrespective of your process or with your process in those uncertain moments. Does any of that ramble make sense?
Dan, I blasted you with I did not throw you one lob. In the last hour, I have not given you any lobs. I basically said, I know Dan can handle it. I'm going to throw him the heat. And I threw you the heat, and you threw the heat right back. I love the way you approach that. And yeah, no, I agree. And I think that anytime you have a process, it's within your control, and therefore, because it's in your control, it's a known. So at a time where you have a lot of unknowns, we'll create more knowns, create some balance, and obviously I think balance is a big thing, whether it's work-life balance, whether it's unknowns versus knowns, certainty versus uncertainty. I think it's almost like, I think sometimes either like a balance scale or even sometimes like a pendulum where things are always moving. And so sometimes you just want to maybe just add a little bit more weight to one side or increase the odds of things going in one direction. And I think the more knowns you have, a little more comfort, a little more certainty. We know how many athletes say, "Oh, I just couldn't get comfortable out there." Okay, well, we could talk for 2 hours on the word comfortable. right? I mean, what is it? And here it is. This person, this athlete says, I couldn't get comfortable out there. Okay. Do you even know what comfort is? Have you explored it? Like, what are the aspects of comfort? What do you need in order to feel comfort on one end of the pendulum? And then when you swing the other way, what are the things that pull you away from feeling comfortable? And I think if you can gain clarity on those things, there's a lot of opportunity in just the word comfortable. I mean, how many athletes have blamed their inability to get comfortable on the court, on the pitch, on the field, or in their chair if they're esports, right? They couldn't get comfortable, therefore they couldn't perform. Okay, well, where is this destination? Does anyone know? Like, how do if I type in a GPS, if I go on Waze and say I want to go to comfortable, how do I even get there? Do you know how to get there? And I think a lot of people even struggle with just the word comfort.
I completely
Anyways,
agree. And yeah. And just before we wrap things up, you can also
sure.
lean into the literature on flow and clutch states, effortful and effortless states. Athletes you use the word comfort. When you talk to athletes about them at their best, they tend to talk about effortless states, whereas you want to try to broaden their horizon around, well, you can compete in an effortful state, and some researchers have called this flow versus clutch. Other researchers have different terms, but I completely agree. Again, look at, to finish things off here, look at what you're saying. In many respects, you're talking about the importance of conversation. You've spoken to the importance of having conversation around comfort versus discomfort. And again, we live in a world whereby athletes, sports people tend to like to do rather than talk, and maybe even think, because maybe they're a bit scared of overthinking, or maybe just that they're inclined to be, that way. They're that way inclined as human beings, and cognition isn't necessarily their friend from a thinking about things perspective. Now that can work for some, and maybe it can deserve others. Too much thinking, sure, there's such a thing, of course there is, but where you want to try and hit that sweet spot of thinking about it a bit more, having more conversation. I write a lot about this in organizations, in sport, having more conversations on this kind of stuff in an optimal way is absolutely crucial. It's just sometimes that environment is too scared of it. But look, it's been a fascinating conversation with you today.
Likewise, yeah, and that's why one of my favorite words is curiosity. Think about it. The better coach you are, the more questions you ask, and the more clarity you gain. And just curiosity and clarity; those two words alone have a lot for either organizations or us as coaches, or even just people within themselves. Just ask yourself, why did I do that? Why did that result happen? Gain some clarity, and then keep going deeper with the questions until you get to an endpoint. And sometimes that journey alone can yield some great awareness. So, Dan, can't thank you enough. Thank you so much, and thanks for sharing your insights and your knowledge. I love the depth that we went. I love that we answered the tough questions. I didn't throw any lobs. I didn't give you any easy ones, and you fielded them better than anyone else could have. So, thank you so much. And then, if someone wants to reach out to you and wants to hire you, or read one of your books, or just learn more about you, because I know you have a course. And is that course more soccer based?
Yes, it is soccer based. So if anybody wants to reach out, I'm very simple, danabrahams.com. So thank you for that, Jay. Really appreciated. I'm on multiple social media platforms. I write every day on LinkedIn and Facebook. So come find me there. LinkedIn is just find Dan Abrahams. And then on Facebook, it's at Dan Abrahams Soccer. On Twitter, I have 3 Twitter accounts, but I'll give you the main one. It's at Dan Abrahams 77. And on Insta, I am at Dan Abrahams Sport. My books can be found on my website that link you over to Amazon. That's the best way. I'll just find them on Amazon. That's Soccer Tough, Soccer Tough 2, Soccer Brain, and Golf Tough. And my online soccer academy is just that. It's a soccer mental skills academy for players, coaches, and parents to work on the mental side of the game. It's actually supported, even though I'm English, British, it's supported 25 college programs, US college programs from Division 1 to Division 3. in soccer this past fall, and we support a number of soccer clubs in America. Its politics is a very different landscape, soccer in America to the UK. We won't get into that now, but yeah. So if anybody's interested there, you can just pop onto my website and find that. So Jay, I can't thank you enough. Really appreciate you giving me the opportunity. And I suppose one more thing would be my podcast, which you said, which is the Sports Psych Show, which I host every week. So I can't thank you enough for your time, and appreciate all of your great questions. And thank you.